boys and girls. It's Mrs. Laferia. Welcome to chapter 2 of the quest story. It's another video lesson with a link to some materials that we would have used in class had we had class this week. But Mrs. Laferia is still recovering, and I hopefully will be back on Monday. So I always put some interesting things in the lesson for you to see. And I think you spotted over here these oranges. And one of the things that are really important to eat during the winter months are oranges and your vitamin C. And I've been eating a lot of oranges and citrus fruit because they help you heal. You can see that says scurvy, S-C-U-R-V-Y, the circle with a line through it. What does that mean? That's something you can look up. I told my children, Sam, Natalie, and Ellen, that I call these oranges, and I draw faces on them and put them in their lunchbox. It makes it much more interesting. And sometimes I write sayings on them. You are kind. It's always important to eat healthy, but especially so when you're sick. I have a little bowl of acorns, you might have noticed. I picked those up, and I thought the bottoms looked more interesting if you painted some of them. So I just took poster paint and painted some blue and yellow and orange. That might be a good craft for you. And I have a story for you this week, and it's actually a wordless picture book. Because what wordless picture books are good for, we were going to talk about this week, my favorite of all skills. I don't know if you can see that, inferencing. And kids sometimes groan when they think about interesting, but honestly, Questies, this is what we're the best at. We are great at figuring things out where we have to put clues together. You have to form conclusions by looking for evidence. You have to speculate. You have to make guesses. It's not real clear, but it's putting evidence together. Now, we do a lot of that with writing, with text-dependent analysis, and you have to look back at the text and find supportive material. You can do that same thing with wordless picture books, and sometimes that's great for a quest class period. So I want to show you this book, and I'll put on this blog some links of some things that you can look up. So not only do you have healthy eating that I want you to do, and some crafts if you want to do, look up David Weisner. This book, Mr. Waffles, is one that Mrs. Bollinger in the library told me about. She said it was her daughter's favorite book, and she showed it to me, and I fell in love with it. I wasn't aware of the book, and I had never read the book, although I was somewhat familiar with David Weisner. He won the Caldecott, the best drawings in a children's book, 3 times. He's the best out of all the submissions. And it's really worth taking a look, and there's all kinds of links I'm going to put on this blog if you want to check them out. Now, here's the book, Mr. Waffles. I'll see if I can get it so you can see the best without a lot of glare. And I'm not going to narrate a whole lot. I just want you to look at the pictures and then see if you can figure out what this is about. Make some inferences, because that's what Questies do. That's what thinkers do. You didn't lose the sound. I'm just not saying a word, which is very hard for me to do. I'm still here. You can probably hear my dog in the background. She's protesting this cat book. I need a drink of my coffee. I told you this book was great. Stick with it. Can you figure out what's happening? Hi, Natalie. My daughter's in the background. And my dog. This is probably one of my favorite pages. Now, I think there's props to David Weisner. Here's some of the other books that you might want to look up, and we've got most of them in our libraries, in the elementary libraries. I checked it out. Now, what I want to ask you is if there's a couple questions when we meet again next week for class. We're going to take a look at this, and I could ask you a very literal question. Like, for example, these are all the toys that Mr. Waffles snubs. And if you were carefully looking, you could see some of those had prices on. What did Mr. Waffles' owner, how much did he or she spend on their cat, trying to keep their cat entertained? So that's a literal question. You could go back through the video, stop it, add it up. You can find those answers. It's right or wrong. There's probably some guesstimates on some of them that are fuzzy. But that is going to be one question I'm going to ask you. And then I'm going to ask you some questions where you have to make a lot of inferences. And I think you can kind of tell what happens in the story. We're also going to be talking about perspective and looking at the story through the cat's eyes and through these guys' eyes. I think you saw some forms of language there. So a couple of inferences I want you to make. Can you make anything out from that language? Also, I want you to take a look at the differences in the robe color of the little alien guys. Are there differences in behavior or language if they have different robe colors on? Why would they have different robe colors on? These are things that you cannot, there's no words. They couldn't be right or wrong. They're things that are up for discussion, but we certainly could find proof, and you can argue one way or the other. I think the red ones are this type of people because this is how they talk, or I think the triangle means this. I want you really to take a look at it and see if you can come up. We're going to have a great discussion involving this book when I get back next week. It's one of my favorites, and you can be certain that we're going to be looking at some of the other picture books from David Weisner. I think some of you spotted too this. Does that look familiar to you? It should in the elementary libraries. This means a lot to Clark because there's a mystery going on at Clark School. One of these orange gears is missing from the library. It is the great Fred S. Clark mystery that is bothering all of us, trying to figure out where that orange gear went. So I took it upon myself to find a similar one, and I made this. This is my own copy of an orange gear, and we are going to get to the bottom of where this orange gear went. We've got to put some clues together. We've got to figure it out, and between me and you and Mrs. Brom and Mrs. Bollinger and Mrs. Peters, we're going to get to the bottom of this missing orange gear. You're going to have to make a few inferences, and we're going to have to argue. We're going to have to look for clues, but we'll see if we can come up with something. So, boys and girls, it's time for me to take a rest again. There should be a couple of links below this video. This video ended up being about almost 15 minutes, but it's probably good to hear my voice. I had your attention for 15 minutes, and I didn't have to yell at you once. And if you had to use the bathroom or get a drink, you could just pause the video and you could just go and then come back to the video. I love this format. So this will leave us more time for discussion. We didn't have to waste 15 minutes looking at the book and all crowding around and talking about it. Now you already know what we're going to talk about next class. We're talking about David Weisner, Mr. Waffles, and really anything you can find out. Scholastic is a great site. Pinterest I checked, it seemed fine. You can Google image Mr. Waffles, and the little individual shots come up. So if you want to zoom a picture of a certain frame, you should be able to find it on your devices, your home computers. Everything looks pretty safe and legit. And I will get those puzzles to you. You should have them if you're logged on to this, because the address is on there. And then I should be seeing you next week. So keep your fingers crossed. I'm healing well. I miss you lots. study hard, and we'll see you very, very soon.